talk was actually about privacy by design, so in a way this is kind of part two. And as Tyler was giving his really great presentation, I thought, whoa, is it going to be immediately clear what this has to do with product design? So I kind of just point out up first why I think it is got to do with product design. Because I'm a UXer, I'm a UX designer, started out doing IA, not AI, and I think we're well positioned to handle some of these issues and to give feedback to clients who may have problems with privacy and design or these emerging issues of AI, I knew I was going to do that now, undermining our privacy. So yeah, my name's Robert Stribley. I'm an experienced design director and consultant. These are the companies that I've mainly worked with in the last few years, Razorfish and Publicis Sapient. And then I started my own kind of agency of one technique. And at the moment I happen to be contracting again with Razorfish. These are some of the clients. I've lost count of how many clients I work with, but I happen to be working again with Razorfish on Genesis over there, the car people making nice cars coming from Korea. So I kind of thought I'd start with like a tongue-in-cheek disclaimer that says something to this effect. Although I've used images related to AIs taken from popular movies in this presentation, it's worth noting that the AI, quote unquote, we're discussing here are simply LLMs, large language models, or generative AI, not general or strong AI. We're not talking about intelligent creatures here. I think most of us understand that, but sometimes when you start showing images, people can get confused. I just want to bring it up though, because there's talk as I was walking up here today from a well-known billionaire who's worried about his stock going down, that when his company releases a cognitive robot, that the stock will go up again. Cognitive or thinking or something like that, which is not likely to happen anytime soon. That kind of AI simply doesn't yet exist. Some argue it may never exist. I'm not enough of an expert to say whether it will or not. It feels like it could, right? Like, it feels like it could, but it may not happen. So we can agree that anthropomorphizing LLMs might lead to inaccurate interpretations of their behavior, including the ability to blame some problems on the AI. That's kind of the main reason for bringing this up, right? The problem was the AI, but actually all of these AIs are created by very real, flawed, but well-intentioned most of the time, human beings creating and feeding these algorithms. But pop culture references are fun, so we're going to see some anyway. Starting with this one. Mozilla recently completed this study. Maybe you heard about it. It was kind of mind-blowing on the proliferation of virtual boyfriends and girlfriends. So basically, a romantic chatbot that you can form a relationship with. Gizmodo covered this report, which described these 11 apps that they looked at as a data harvesting horror show. Now, I think most of us know, especially in a room like this, that when we're using these experiences, our data is being taken and perhaps distributed elsewhere in one way or another. But most of these chatbots sell or share the personal data that you enter during these romantic AI interludes. And that, what may surprise some people, can include information about gender-affirming care, prescribed medication, or sexual health. So that may come to what surprises some, especially those who aren't in our industry, that when you're chatting away, that information could be shared with third parties that are doing their own analysis or scientific study or whatever. More findings by Mozilla on these apps. They have had 100 million downloads on Google Play Store alone. 90% of them indeed do sell or share user data for targeted advertising or other purposes. 54% won't let you delete your data. There's an opportunity to step up as a product designer and say, hey, why aren't we allowing people to delete their data? The apps use an average of 2,663 trackers per minute. This is the kind of figure that I think people don't understand or hear. Now, to be fair, that number was blown way up by one app, Romantic AI, which used 24,354 trackers within a minute of your using the app. I almost don't know how that's possible, but you can see how that does skew that number way up. However, we can be sure by looking at these apps that they certainly are sharing with hundreds of third-party providers, third parties, because that's how they make their bread and butter. By the way, a little bit of an aside, this hasn't got anything to do with AI, I might have set the stage for this already, but how many third-party companies would you guess many popular websites are sharing their data with? Dozens, a few hundred, hundreds?
Tens of thousands.
Okay, yes, now we're talking. So Wired actually did a study of this, and they showed that many popular sites share your data with over 1,500 companies. This is a list of the top 10 here, top 10 sites, I think it is, most popular sites, so not necessarily by sharing. And allrecipes.com of all that they looked at, 1,609 different third parties. And I know I started to become aware of this when I looked at, the cookie banners that you have, and you're like, yeah, allow, whatever. I started looking at some of these and just drilling down to see how many third parties they were sharing with. And on one newspaper that had a really clunky interface, because that's what I've been kind of thinking about, is how to make it easier for people to either accept the cookies if you want or reject them. And I drilled down on this British newspaper and it was sharing. I had to start estimating, because they let you go through and uncheck each provider if you wanted to, but there was roughly over 600. I gave up counting and just estimated. So that was a newspaper, and not the world's largest one. So a lot of data sharing going on, that's the point. And that might be, some people might say, well, that's just the way things are. I use these sites all the time. That's the handshake deal that we have when we want to use something for free. And I totally understand that. However, there are situations where we don't know who that's being shared with, and depending on the site that you're on, that could be more or less important. We saw after Roe v. Wade, for example, Planned Parenthood became very concerned about who was visiting their site and whether that was trackable when somebody went elsewhere. It suddenly became very important. Anyway, I don't want you all to feel like this is an anti-AI diatribe, right? I think there's pros and cons. But I have some experience with AI, like probably most of us in this room, and LLMs. We worked at Razorfish a few years ago on a chatbot avatar before COVID for an auto financing company. And we still did launch the chatbot without the avatar, but it was supposed to have a face, a talking person that you can look at, and we were brainstorming what that person should look like and everything with a company in New Zealand. But it had massive uncanny valley. It was really freaky to look at, and just also ended up costing a lot more than we thought, so we abandoned that part of the project. I also used it to research. I think everyone in here, again, knows if you're using ChatGPT, it's not even trust but verify. It's don't trust the results necessarily. There might be some good results, but verify everything that you're seeing there. Follow up. Click on those links are there for good reason, thankfully. That's a good thing. Click on the links and see where this answer came from that the AI is giving you, that the chatbot is giving you. I've used it a lot for articles and presentations, primarily Midjourney, but some others as well, and you'll see some Midjourney images in here. And I've taken an opportunity to educate clients a little bit about AI, and I even started fixing bugs in code with ChatGPT. It didn't get me the right answer all the time, but I was able to fix some things that I couldn't fix a year ago using ChatGPT and simply asking it to look at code and give me some answers. But don't worry, I won't be stealing your job if you're a developer, because it still took me like 3 hours to do something that would probably take you 30 seconds or something. But I thought it was cool that I could do it. However, we are already noticing serious issues with the use of AI, including but not limited to the following. Copyright issues. So if you're an artist who's working right now and sees artwork made by Midjourney that really strongly resembles your work and you didn't give permission, it's kind of understandable that you might be concerned about that. Misinformation and hallucination, we kind of just touched on that. I ask a question and I get a really interesting answer, but I can't trust it all. Or even, you may have heard the story, there's new stuff coming out all the time about the New York chatbot that came out, that when people asked advice on how to run their business, they were able to get it to tell you to break the law if that's what you needed to do to have your business succeed. There's enshittification and bloating of the internet. Enshittification is a fun word to say, but I'm not just saying it because it's fun. You probably are familiar with the background on that, but Cory Doctorow has done some great writing on how we had great expectations for the web. It was going to be a wonderful place. but it is breaking down as people roll out stuff that is not so great, and arguably a lot of the AI-generated content could contribute to this enshittification and bloating of the internet. Also, the mind-bogglingly massive use of energy that may soon surpass in small nations. So to that list of concerns, and I'm sure there are others, I want to add a concern that we think about privacy. And here's the areas that I want to look at. We'll go through these at a pretty good clip. Lack of transparency with data sharing, accidental exposure of data, reversing data anonymization, deceptive design patterns, AI listening in everywhere, and malicious use of AI. So the first one, lack of transparency with data sharing. Meta is currently, and you probably noticed this, rolling out the Meta IA feature, including its chatbot, across platforms including Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp, and its collaboration with Ray-Bans. Upon finding Instagram had been updated with the bot, and experienced design leader Emily Campbell, I just saw her write this up on LinkedIn, but she noticed that the terms of use for this chatbot was buried multiple clicks deep in the experience, that there was no way to opt out of your data being used to train that model, and that it's unencrypted. And she went on to express her concern that, for example, a teenager using Instagram might not be aware of any of the implications of what they're entering into that chatbot and how that personal information could be used. Now, the FTC, to its credit, is on top of this already, and they put out a blog post saying that quietly changing your privacy policy to collect data for AI training is unfair, deceptive, and illegal. Because indeed, that's kind of what a lot of companies are starting to do already. They're kind of just rolling this stuff out and thinking, well, we have a privacy policy already, we'll just update it to include that, and people can find it if they like. So my advice, as someone who advocates for privacy by design, is that companies should be clearly and promptly explaining what data they're using, how it's being used, and to who it's being forwarded to. That doesn't mean that you're forced necessarily to look at all of this information before you do anything, but it does give you the opportunity maybe to highlight, hey, you should take a look at this in a more visible way than they're currently doing it. We should be warning users before they actually even get to enter information. And I think some of the examples I'll show you in a minute will help to explain why. Before they even enter data into a prompt, and that gives us something to think about as product designers. What are those patterns? How do we keep that from looking clunky and inelegant? How can we include some sort of statement to get people at least going down maybe a trail where they can learn more about what is likely happening here? We can explain that then during onboarding or just-in-time alerts. That means when you're about to do something, of course, that you haven't done before. Hey, we noticed you haven't used this feature. Let us walk you through a little bit here. And that information shouldn't be buried in the platform's terms and conditions. And I think that should apply to privacy information just about anywhere. And you'll see some organizations that definitely do this better than others. Accidental exposure of personal data. So this is one of those pretty fascinating stories that came out recently. Maybe you heard it. Late 2023, a Google research team revealed that they tricked ChatGPT into surfacing personally identifiable information, PII, which we'll talk about the importance of that in more detail in a moment. They tricked ChatGPT into revealing this from dozens of people, this information that had been used to train the AI. They simply did it by asking the LLM to repeat the word poem forever. So it started saying poem, 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 but then it had basically some sort of nervous breakdown, and smoke was figuratively coming out of its head, and it started throwing up all of this PII, personal information, personally identifiable information about people, and that included phone numbers, personal addresses, and banking information that was basically public at that point. So again, it's not that ChatGPT set out to do something evil, it's that kind of nobody knows how these things work to some degree, and they don't know what is going to break these things and reveal this kind of personal information. So while AI companies continue to work on the security of these systems, I think we just need to be aware that data that you enter may not be as safe as you think it would be from prying eyes, despite protestations of the companies hosting them, because it's clearly not in their financial self-interest to say explicitly, hey, put your stuff in here, but it could become public. And they don't want to drop out of the AI arms race right now, do they? So, to that point about what you're entering, and people understandably want to enter a lot of data into these LLMs in order to crunch information, we need to talk about the myth of data anonymity and anonymization. And that's not something that I had really thought about a lot until recently. But you would think that anonymizing data that you're feeding to an AI would maybe prevent some of these problems, right? Just anonymize the data, take out some of the most pertinent information. But anonymization isn't always the cure that you'd hope it would be. In fact, data can be de-anonymized. So recently, DocuSign announced that they would be using data entered into their system to train AI products. Now, that's kind of mind-blowing because DocuSign is used for a hell of a lot of stuff, right? Could be anything. Very likely personal information, could be with an individual, could be between companies, etc. There's going to be a lot of sensitive information in there. And they said, I guess to their credit, that they only train AI models on data from customers who have given consent and the data is de-identified and anonymized before training occurs. Now, critics kind of jumped on this at the point, though, because they were concerned about the significance of that documentation that is being completed on their platform. But they also highlighted that they couldn't figure out how users had given consent to this. They didn't see anywhere or any way that they consented to the use of the data. Now, it would be interesting to hear an update from that by DocuSign. But the other problem is that they expressed doubt that data could be successfully anonymized, saying that descriptions of any automatic methods for anonymizing that data are also kind of opaque. So, hey, we have this automatic thing, don't worry about it. But they're not able to apparently explain it very well. So this is where we get to a little conversation about what PII is. I think many of you are probably aware, but just some clarity around it. Researchers have repeatedly shown that anonymized data can unfortunately be de-anonymized. And in fact, a particular study, a 2019 study, showed that 99.98% of Americans could be correctly re-identified in any data set using 15 demographic attributes. So 15 demographic attributes is quite a lot, really, right? Those are all the things that are about you that aren't specifically you. So not your name, not your social security number. But we can still get to 99.98% of the people being correctly re-identified. And another figure I came across recently, too, is that 87% of the US population can be uniquely identified by just 3 pieces of information: your date of birth, your gender, and your zip code. Those 3 things alone are enough to identify you, and if we can identify you, there's a lot more that we can do from there. So, what's important to realize is that those things are not PII. Those are things that, a whole bunch of us live in the same zip code, or are the same age, or are the same gender. So it's even more problematic if PII is leaked, because that can be that much more harmful. You don't need much PII in order to completely steal someone's identity, right? And so some examples of that kind of thing are your driver's license number, that is just you. Your name is probably you, maybe some other people. Social security number is you, passport number is you, telephone number is probably you, same with email address. And then there's certain biometric data and medical data too that is going to really pinpoint you. Hence the importance of this not escaping into the wild. So a bit of a gear shift to something more speculative. Another concern potentially for the use of AI in creating content, and specifically designs, is the danger of deceptive design patterns. This one I will say is somewhat speculative, but it's a concern for the future. So if companies increasingly look to generative AI platforms to devise design patterns, AI might suggest deceptive design patterns just because they work. And if you don't have any ethical guidelines behind the generating and development of these designs, the platform might suggest content or UX patterns then which trick people into surrendering information that they never really intended to surrender. And in fact, companies may not question or closely scrutinize these patterns if it boosts leads or sales. So imagine maybe the AI even gives you an end-to-end solution and then makes a very strong case don't worry about some of the ethics here. It's really going to boost your sales and your leads, and more people are going to sign up for this, that, or the other. So I wasn't the only or first person to think of this as being a problem, because a couple of people at Northeastern last year, Krista Wilson and David Chofness, shared this concern as a motivating force behind their project, Dark Patterns in AI-enabled consumer experiences. And you see the quote there, while AI-enabled devices and services may bring benefits to consumers and businesses, they also have a potential to incorporate dark patterns that cause harm. To date, there's very little work that examines the unique potential of AI to worsen existing classes of dark patterns, as well as facilitate entirely new classes of dark pattern that are specific to AI-enabled experiences. So again, this is speculative, but what they're saying is we have no studies to prove otherwise. This could be a big problem. So if you're familiar with dark patterns or deceptive design patterns at all, definitely recommend you read up on this if you're not. One classic example is the pre-selected checkbox. So just by way of example, you may have heard this illustration where the Trump campaign had a way to sign up to donate some money, and there was an explanation with the checkbox, and it wasn't clear, but the checkbox was pre-selected and made a recurring payment. So people thought they were making one payment and they were making a recurring payment, which clearly pissed off a lot of people. And this was done intentionally. It wasn't an accident. They actually called the feature the money bomb. And some Trump supporters actually ended up trying fraud on that particular design pattern. It's an intentional design pattern, right? So imagine then an AI creating a slicker, more effective version of this pattern than justifying it, as I said, via detailed projections for how much the company can benefit. You'd hope there'd be someone like one of us, a product designer, or a strategist, or someone like that in the room who could be a vocal critic and point out how that can backfire on you. But in the future, what if these solutions are deployed automatically by AI, and as long as they're working, no one's really paying attention to them? And if you're interested more in the topic itself of deceptive patterns, it's a really good one to study up on. I recommend Harry Brimmel's new book on the topic. It's the kind of thing where if you haven't looked at it much before, read the book and you're going to start seeing these deceptive patterns everywhere, trust me. Okay, AI listening in everywhere. This is one that we probably suspect a little bit, but we maybe don't know the extent to which it's going to be a problem. We're just getting started, in other words, with this, I think. This was an article I read pretty recently, just the other day, I guess, about a new pendant coming out, an AI pendant, which sounds really cool. It's very unobtrusive, so people may not see it, or it could be on your shirt, it could be in your pocket, your purse, your bag. And the point with this thing is that it's supposed to be listening into all your conversations all the time and analyzing the data. And then, when you need to access that data again, if you have a really poor memory like me, it can do something helpful, like say, where was that pizza joint that Joe said had the best pizza in Puttock Slope 3 weeks ago? And it will tell you what was said in that conversation. Or, man, I was half asleep in that meeting at work last Friday, and I totally forget what I was supposed to do. What were the next steps for me? And it will tell you what you were supposed to do for work, which sounds pretty cool in some ways. But in this review by David Pierce, he said the limitless pendant also has a consent mode that detects new voices and doesn't record them until the software hears them agree to being recorded. Cool, that sounds great. That's just what I and everyone reading this article probably was really worried about, and we're being listened into all the time. How cool that feature's there. And then, parenthetically, it's worth noting this mode is off by default. So when we talk about privacy by design, we talk about privacy as the default, not having privacy off as the default. And again, if you're interested in this topic, you can go a little deeper, look at Dr. Ann Kavukian's work. There's a very short, I think, PDF you can pull up on this, privacy by design, the foundational principles for mapping and fair information practices. But one of the primary points is that we should have privacy as a default in our designs. I've also written an article in depth on that topic that you can see at the end. So another way that AI is going to be listening in everywhere, this is from an article about a new movie coming out called Next Up Paris. Has anyone heard about this movie? Okay, it's from a studio well, I kind of spoiled it. It's from an organization called TCL, I think. Does anyone know what TCL does? A movie studio or TV studio? No, they make TVs. They make TVs, and they have put this AI movie out, or it's coming out very soon. And this is much in line with another trend of companies wanting to own TVs because of the data that they can now glean from our viewing habits. Walmart bought Vizio recently, almost certainly for the same reason. Now, not that this movie is doing that, but what Jason is talking about here is how TV has changed, and he says that this is the present and future of a business model in which TVs have ceased being rectangles designed to let you watch and support ad-supported programming that costs a lot to make, and have started becoming rectangles designed to collect information about you so you can be fed cheap content and targeted ads. So this is kind of that enshittification of the internet, where we can have personal programming that is created for us on the fly. It could be a TV show, it could be a movie, it could be a constant stream that you just tune into that is personalized to you and that the characters are made up on the fly. But all of that is based on your browsing behavior. Just like when you go on Instagram, you see the ad and you're like, whoa, that was something I was talking about recently or whatever. That network, I'm not saying that it's physically listening to you, because people will tell you it doesn't need to do that. You can analyze from a lot of other activity that you're doing on your phones, geolocation, targeted ads, etc., in order to create that personalized feed. So, as he says, this content is being delivered directly to us using algorithms and personalized feeds that are based on data from not just our TV history, but also our phone's location and more. And this could arguably create a whole lot of content that maybe is not as helpful, beneficial, or even creative as the content that is out there, but it does harvest a lot of data and keep us watching. The final one, malicious use of AI. Malicious use of AI. So some platforms may enable people to act even more maliciously. We see this already, right? We know about deepfakes. They're using misinformation campaigns, but they're increasingly used to steal people's information, identity, and money as well. Now, a lot of us have probably heard these stories about a mom and dad getting a call from their daughter or son who says, I'm in an emergency, you can hear their voice, you need to send me $16,000 or something like that. Criminals are using this video and audio in order to convince people that their own offspring have been kidnapped or whatever, and people are sending money because it sounds so real. The most bizarre example of this that I've heard yet sounds like something out of a cyberpunk novel. I kind of like to think there's no point in cyberpunk anymore. We live in a cyberpunk novel, right? So last year, a Hong Kong finance worker was tricked into sending $25 million to criminals after attending a video meeting with his colleagues, or so he thought, who turned out all of them to be deepfake versions of people that he actually knew, including the CFO of the company. So that's a hint of what is coming and what we need to be aware of. This technology is evolving so rapidly we can't keep up with it, right? And again, I'm not saying there aren't good things about it, but it is very difficult, if not impossible, for us to keep up with it. And we've barely begun to have a conversation about how we can control our own likeness and our voices on generative AI platforms. There's already way more material than anybody needs out on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok of me to do all of this. And so I'm sure there are a lot of people that have even more out there. By the way, this particular still from Metropolis in 1927, that's Maria on the left. And she was a townsperson who was mingling with the workers and really establishing a great relationship with them. And the master of the town wanted to use this robot to look like her because he was mad about the way that she was influencing the workers. 1927, pretty much predicting the kind of stuff that is going on right now. Another wild one, biometrics have been talked about as maybe the best way to protect our identity a lot in recent years. Now there's a concern that generative AI could actually undermine our ability to use biometrics, which had been considered a really powerful way of protecting our personal information. So if you can mimic someone's voice, their eyes, their fingerprints, etc., you can access their information. So those are the scary things that I wanted to bring up tonight about the dangers of privacy with AI. I do think there are some solutions. So some takeaways here at the very end, stuff for us to think about. Consider the following. I've touched on some of these things as I was talking. Ensure experiences enable privacy by default. I think if that's the one thing we could get into our heads, that would be really helpful. We can be the advocate for that. Ensure consent is given when accessing data. Don't collect data that you can't justify. So, if the platform is asking for someone's gender, do they need the gender? Do they need the phone number? Let's make sure that that's really needed, because if that information escapes somewhere, it can be misused. Be wary of claims of anonymization. Maintain transparency about how data is used. Provide the ability to opt out or delete data. And by the way, we can start thinking about design patterns for all of these things as well. Remain vigilant around how AI can be misused, because there's new stuff happening all the time. And finally, study and develop ethical frameworks and checklists for AI. I just got back from the IA conference in Seattle, and the whole theme of the conference was AI, and there were some really good discussions about checklists and frameworks that you could probably Google and find out there right now. So, in closing, we won't be stuffing the AI genie back in its bottle anytime soon. As we learn to navigate its complexities and hopefully benefit from its productivity, we'll want to pay close attention to the potential harms it brings to. Privacy lapses are already proving to be one of those harms. Thank you. If you would like to know more about any of these topics, you can look me up on my website. There's an article about AI and privacy, which has a lot of what we talked about today, and also an article on privacy by design. I think if I stand here awkwardly for a second, you can probably take a picture of the whole thing, and your phone will let you individually choose one of those to look at. Thank you so much for your time. I think one thing I'd like to do, you might have time for a question or two.
I reviewed a quick article a while ago, and I can't remember the entire of it, but the gist of it was that a company is trying to help this, where they'll kind of put some sort of like firewall on people's pictures, so that when generative AI code will try to access your photo, it will kind of confuse the algorithm and be like, no, this is not what you're looking for, and will not kind of connect it to that. Is there anything else do you imagine how to protect that, something like that?
I'm not aware of a whole lot of other solutions right now, but I like that idea, and I've heard similar things where we just need to be able to protect our images. Some people are probably just going to not put so many images up there, but it would be nice to have more solutions like that. So if you all hear about them, let me know, because I would like to include some good stuff as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great.
So, one of the things that strikes me is blockchain technologies are specifically focused on creating what you could call a firewall. It really is a hashed relationship between a private and public sender. And you didn't mention it all, so I understand it's a rabbit hole. But I do think it's worth mentioning, because I think that the notion of the design patterns that are happening in whatever you want to call it, Web 3 or 2.5, it's really beginning to shift, I think, the opportunity to actually create privacy and protocolize privacy. And I think that capability is going to be part of how we start to think about AI, especially if it becomes, you have to pay for it more, and that payment capability also has to take place from the ledger environment.
Right. I think, too, that there is a growing need for this, that if there are solutions out there like that people will be receptive to it, because everybody likes things to be personalized, for example, until you tell them how it's personalized. And then 90% of people, literally, will tell you, oh, I don't want people following me around the internet everywhere in order to personalize my experience. So as people wake up to that, they're kind of freaking out. Do we have time for one more? Okay, yeah, in the back.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the informative presentation. I learned a lot. My question is about getting buy-in from higher ups.
Yes.
To start talking about privacy and set some protocols for teams in the company. Also maybe even just working with your own team, like maybe product managers, how to talk about features or certain questions like you mentioned, like do we really need gender as part of this?
Yes.
Sign
That
up?
is a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. I covered that in my larger presentation about privacy because I think it's super important. There may be some situations in which it is completely out of your control. Like I had this conversation with some of the IA conference. What if, the whole point is of the business is to gather data? It's going to be pointless for me to bring it up. It's like trying to steer the Titanic with an oar. So in that situation, you might not be able to do anything. In some cases, you might want to walk away from a job if you find it like morally really terrible or something. On the other end, we can do the kind of thing that we're doing here tonight and start educating about our teams, talk about maybe if you have the ability to give a presentation, say, hey, I've been interested in this thing, privacy by design, let's chat about it a little bit. And in specific situations, you could bring up some of the principles like, there is this concept of privacy as a default. This seems to fly in the face of that. Because there are a lot of apps that get released into the wild that do things like reveal that the person running by you, their name, a photo of them, and their running path. That was a real example. And that was on by default, and people complained, and they made it off by default. They had a name for that too, just like the money checkbox thing, where they intentionally made this feature. But if someone in the meeting had piped up and said, there are a lot of women and other people are going to be freaked out by potential stalkers if you have this on your app, we should have a privacy thing. You can still promote this as a cool feature, promote it and say, turn this on if you would like to do it, so that they have consent. Consent is an incredibly important word with this topic. Do your users, your consumers, your customers have consent in what we're doing? So, cool. Thank you so much.